Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Christine, your host and certified perinatal mental health professional. Today's episode is a special one for Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario's Climb Out of the Darkness fundraising event. The event name came about because together we are climbing out of the darkness that we feel when we are in the midst of a perinatal mental health crisis and need support. At PWO, we help people living with a perinatal mood and/or anxiety disorder connect to supports as soon as possible that are either low cost or free. The perinatal period includes trying to conceive a baby, being pregnant, and welcoming a baby into your family. We are so excited to raise awareness and destigmatize perinatal mental health. The funds raised in 2023 will go towards offering free support groups and free individual peer mentors. Please consider donating to the climb from our website, or you can find the link in the show notes. On these two bonus episodes, we are going to talk about accessing different types of supports in the perinatal period when you are experiencing symptoms of a mood or anxiety disorder. Different supports can include peer support, individual therapy, group therapy, a naturopathic doctor, medication, self-help, among many others. On today's episode, I am so excited to have Amber Sperling talking about the benefits of individual therapy and Kelley Hassanpour about the benefits of group work and group therapy. Make sure you check out Tuesday's episode where I spoke with Karen Toms about the benefits of peer support, Dr. Nikki Neefin about working with a naturopathic doctor, and Allison Flynn Bowman about the organization Life with a Baby. We hope these episodes can help you learn about these different supports and to know that you can reach out for help. You are not alone. On this segment of the Climb podcast episode, we are talking with Amber Sperling, who is a registered social worker, and you're working in private practice with people in the perinatal period. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So Amber, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself in terms of your experience having kids and what that was like for your mental health?
Yeah, I can definitely share that prior to having my own kids, I worked in mental health for quite a while, but I did not do a lot of work in the perinatal period. So I had my first daughter in 2016 and very quickly realized this was not anything I had experienced before, nor could anybody have prepared me for or really explained what it was like. I remember sitting there with her, really realizing, 7 years post-secondary education, and I'm sitting here in a chair not really knowing what to do with this little human to keep her alive. Part of the journey to get there prior was I had an emergency C-section. Never in my wildest dreams would have expected to have a C-section because none of my sisters or close family members had one. I had, difficulty with healing. I had difficulty with breastfeeding, did the tubes, did the pumping, did the, across the board, took the pills. So all these things I really had no expectation of and didn't know what to do with that information. I had amazing midwives both times with both girls. I have two girls now. The second one said something that will stick with me forever. She could tell I was already getting anxious about breastfeeding after my first experience. And she looked at me and she said, "Amber, you have a toddler. You are not going to do all the things you did last time unless you want to, and I'm here for you, but you're not going to do those things. You don't have to. You have another human to take care of." And that was amazing. Like I could feel that in my bones, that this person really heard me and felt me and thought it was going to be okay.
Yeah. It sounds like your midwife really understood the struggle you had with your first. And sometimes that like someone else giving us that permission to say like, it's okay. You don't have to do all the things if you don't want to. That can be so helpful.
Yes. And I really carry that with me because when I'm working with new moms and dads and birthing people, I put myself in that space. And sometimes I know they need to hear that. And so offering that as an option, like what if someone gave you permission to not keep doing what you're doing? And and just seeing like in their eyes what I felt like, oh, there are options. And I think that's big in the, I mean, in life, but in the perinatal period, that like you don't know what you're getting into. A little bit of humor there. You don't know what you're getting into. So it's okay to change your mind, and it's okay to look at different options. So that's, yeah, I've carried that with me.
That's amazing. It's so interesting. I have, as people who've listened to the podcast know my story with nursing and those challenges. I totally relate to what you're saying with the tubes and the medication and the pumping and all the things. And it's funny with my second, because my partner worked out of the country for like from Sunday to Friday every week when I had my second. And when I was pregnant, gave myself the permission, like, I'm going to give myself 2 weeks. If nursing's not going well, I'm just giving him a bottle and like, that's it. I'm not even like thinking about it. I went to the breastfeeding clinic, I got support. It wasn't working. And I gave him the bottle. There was zero guilt. It felt great. It was the best maternity leave I had out of the three of them, to be honest, because I wasn't weighed down with, trying to do all the things with a toddler and a newborn. So it was just interesting how that, like, good old cognitive shift there was really helpful in managing, I didn't feel any guilt at all. I was like, he's thriving, he's doing great. Fantastic.
Yeah. And the difference that like having an informed decision and
Yes.
understanding can make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you said you weren't working in the perinatal field before you welcomed your first child. So when did you shift into the perinatal field?
So as soon as I returned from my first mat leave, coincidentally, many listeners, people know Jamie Charlevoix. So I returned back to my role, and Jamie was implementing after baby groups in the Barrie, well, it's Simcoe County, across Simcoe County. And so I'm in Barrie, and I walked in and they're like, oh, we've started, these groups. Do you have any interest? And I was like, yes, this is like, how did this happen? Did I make this? No, Jamie made it happen. So I became one of the co-facilitators for the after baby group in the Barrie area. We were the only open group, so we, all year round for the most part. And I traded off. I met a lot of different co-facilitators, but over the next few years, that was, something that I became very passionate about. And I was working for the nurse practitioner-led clinic, so many of my clients were diverse, general practice, but I just really loved working with the new moms and dads and noticing the differences that I could make or our work could make in their life, working in a group and one-to-one. And also knowing that trickle down, right? If mom's feeling better, baby has so much more opportunity to thrive. Mm-hmm. And that's just so fulfilling for me.
Right, right. And so, on this segment, we wanted to talk about individual therapy and what that can be like when accessing support, in the perinatal period, whether it's like you're dealing with fertility challenges and you seek individual therapy for that, or you're pregnant and there's maybe a mood or anxiety disorder going on, and postpartum. And so you also work with individuals on an individual therapist level, right?
Yes, the majority of my work is individual.
Right. So can you share with listeners, what does that look like? First of all, we did talk a bit in the last segment, but how do people go about looking for an individual therapist if that's what they want?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people start off by talking to their primary care provider. I think we're all used to that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Oftentimes they might be able to access free services for individual support through primary care. If you're part of like a family health team or a community health CHC, I'm drawing a blank on what the
community health center.
Community health center. But there's other options as well. I mean, there's Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario. Have to say that for sure. Accessing people that have proper training and understanding. I will really emphasize that. I'm biased, but I've worked with a lot of clients that have seen therapists that don't have a framework for working in the perinatal period, and just can see there can be harm. That was a little tangent, but I would also recommend, you can Google therapists near me. A lot of people go on Psychology Today. Locally, I've developed the Simcoe County Perinatal Practitioner Network. So we have a whole network of practitioners that have done additional training and have expertise in the perinatal period if you're in this area. And a lot of them offer virtual services as well.
Perfect. And we will link all of these things in the show notes so that people, if you're listening in your car or you're walking or doing something and you don't have time to write it down, everything will be in the show notes so that people can link to them. And so in individual therapy, I mean, of course, everyone's different. So it's hard to say, like, I could, there's a lot of reoccurring themes that come up with perinatal clients for sure. But if someone's never been to individual therapy, what would you tell them about it? What can it look like potentially?
I love the idea of individual therapy being like you're sitting down with your best friend and feel comfortable saying anything at all, whether serious or humorous, and you feel heard, you feel like you have value, and that that the person that's there with you has an abundance of resources. And if they don't have the resource you need at that time, whether it's through verbal response or through a tangible resource, they're going to find it for you. And maybe that comes into your inbox the next day or the next week when you come back. So therapy is an opportunity for you to figure out, like, what are your values? What is your best you? It's a space to feel vulnerable, but that vulnerability gives you opportunity to, reassess, or I don't know if that's the right word, but connect with who you are and what's not working and what doesn't feel good. I work with a lot of clients that have diagnosed mental health problems, but that's not a requirement for therapy. That you can talk, that you're willing to explore how you're feeling, and you're open to the idea that you can feel better.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of times I think, especially when people have never been in therapy, they come in, and of course there's time. It takes time to build trust. And, there is a inherent power dynamic there, right? Of being the, therapist, so to speak, and the client. And I know for me, I try to work to kind of bring down that power dynamic as much as possible. And, sometimes sharing appropriately, my own stuff in the past, right? But not, depending on the client, of course. But often people are worried, like they're going to judge me, or, even worried about, what are they going to think about my parenting, things like that. What do you say to that for clients who, are hesitant about trying out individual therapy?
I mean, with everybody, I think we all do explaining duty, right? I mean, it's kind of messy and annoying or whatever. It is what it is. But I always start off with, this is a confidential space. Everything you share here, stays within these walls. Except I do have a duty to report if you are at risk yourself, someone else, or a child's at risk. I think that's important, like recognizing off the bat, if you feel as though you are at risk, there's a risk, I'm going to share that information, but I'm also going to tell you if I think there's a risk first, and I'm going to support you in figuring out next steps. I'm going to be honest, that's rare. It doesn't happen very often. I'm sure it's probably the same in your own work. But that's not great. It's a required starting point. I keep words. I have certain words on my board here that obviously you can't see on a podcast, but I have connection, authenticity, and humility. I love the word humility, and I carry this as a therapist, that I am not the expert of you. All of my clients are the experts of themselves, and I work really hard to hold space for that. Like if they say, "Oh, you're going to judge me," I'll say, "I'm not here to judge you. Like you're the expert of you. You're going to know why that happened or what you're thinking, and if you don't, that's okay." Like talk about it, see how you feel afterwards. I think for people who have never been to therapy, realizing that if you don't feel safe talking to the person that's in the room with you, then that's probably a sign that's not your therapist. Usually, it's not often that I have clients that have done a free consult with me and then come in and they're like, this isn't what I want. And I never hear from them again. So really use that free consultation that therapists often offer, because you can connect with people easier or quicker than you think you can, I feel confident to say. But also knowing that a therapist isn't going to be able to do their job, however they define being a successful therapist, if you're not comfortable speaking in their space. So I know that's a trust thing, and lots of people have trust issues, but being able to trust and know that I know me and that person can't tell me that I'm wrong, or um, yeah. I mean, that's a whole therapy session or, year of sessions on its own, that like who cares what other people think? But uh, when it comes to your therapist, it's really trusting that, we've had extensive training, we've had, supervision and consultations, and like there's ongoing other people that are checking in on what we're doing to make sure that we're here to meet your needs.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned, like, if you're feeling like you can't talk in the space, kind of beyond like shyness and, oh, I've never been to therapy, right? If it's feeling like more than that, like you said, it's like, that's not your therapist. That's not the person for you, right? And they can be the nicest person, they can be lovely, but if it's not a good fit, that's okay. Like, I want people to know, like, you have permission. You don't need permission from me or anyone, but you can shop around. You can switch therapists. You can have that conversation with them if that feels important for you. You don't have to have that conversation either. You can just not book your next session. It happens all the time, and that's okay. Like, it's okay. I'm in therapy. Like, I get how that can be awkward and, tough. And so, yeah, like finding that person that kind of relates to your values, someone is like on the same page as you, is really important for sure.
Yeah, and I want to loop back because you had mentioned parenting as well. And I am very clear, or I try to be transparent. I'm not a parenting expert. I am a perinatal mental health professional. And so if there's something that comes up, I will say, maybe we can connect you with someone or some resources that would be more helpful around parenting. Sometimes if I hear something and I'm like, ooh, that doesn't sit right with me, I might say, like, how do you feel about this? You've brought it up. Is this something that you want to explore further? But again, that's rare. That's rare.
So rare. Yeah, I also say the same thing, especially those hot button topics like sleep and feeding and developmental milestones. I always say, like, look, I'm a parent. I have 3 kids. I'm not a child development psychiatrist, expert. Like, I can't tell you the stages and I don't really remember all of it, right? So it's like, I've been there, done that, but I'm not an expert. I did what, worked for us and sometimes didn't work for us and learned from that. But I also absolutely take that position. And of course, you can find a perinatal mental health therapist who has some training in childhood development, or who has like an expertise, so to speak, in like sleep, stuff, or developmental milestones or whatever. If that's what you need and that's what you want, look for someone like that. Right. So, what would you say, outside of like, maybe I've never been to therapy, I'm nervous, I'm scared, what are some barriers that you see in Ontario for people accessing individual therapy?
Well, I think the obvious one is cost.
Yes.
And I am a private practice practitioner, and I get it. I know a lot of people can't afford my services. I know there's also more affordable options, and I'm happy to direct people in those directions. So, Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario, throw that in. But Life with a Baby has programs. There's the free after baby groups in our region that are available. We have regional coordinator who also offers support. PSI, Postpartum Support International, has a plethora of groups that people can access for free.
Yeah, virtual. Yeah.
And I know you're talking about individual. So there's lots of students that are, keen to support and have, lots of supervision. And, sometimes the therapists that are fresh out of school have different perspectives that can be wonderful. I would also say check your benefits. That's a big one. I have a lot of clients that had no idea that they could access unlimited therapy. Like, I know one of the nursing unions in Ontario now has unlimited mental health support. A lot of first line workers like EMS can definitely access their benefits. And if your benefits, a lot of benefits don't offer a lot of like individual compensation for mental health support, but they might offer other options as well, whether it's like EAP or other supports. I also am aware of, like, through Waypoint Ontario Shores, they have programs. If you're looking specific to perinatal mental health support, which I know people listening to this likely are, to be very clear about what's going on in your life, that's the other thing. When you are looking for a referral to a program, especially if it's provincially funded, I just really encourage people to be as honest as you can be to make sure you're referred to the proper person. But there are affordable options out there.
Yeah, I would say, like you said, I mean, if you have benefits or you're able to afford an individual therapist, like we've mentioned, you can look on psychologytoday.com. You can narrow it down to the area you're in, the type of support you're looking for. Like Amber mentioned, looking at someone who has perinatal mental health specific training, for example, through Canadian perinatal mental health trainings, where, we're trained in perinatal mental health supports and kind of how to navigate that. And then, if you're, of course, you can reach out to Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario, where we have student therapists that, offer low cost options for individual therapy. And also in your area. So look in your individual area. There can be some private practice organizations that also have students that are at a sliding scale rate or reduced rate, as well as looking at any public health agencies in your area that might have access to programs through like early on centers or like community resources, things like that. Yeah, community health teams, all those lovely things. So check those out for sure. And then bigger hubs in, for example, Durham region, we have Ontario Shores Mental Health Hospital, where there's a perinatal mental health program. In Toronto, of course, in Hamilton, those bigger hubs that in hospitals, you will find some specific perinatal mental health programs. A lot of times it's group work, but sometimes you can get access to a social worker for individual therapy.
Yeah. I wanted to add, in terms of barriers, because I know I go off on tangents sometimes. A barrier that I have seen over the years is therapists or programming that don't allow babies to be present. And as a perinatal therapist, babies are so welcome. Here's the thing. If you need support, you deserve support, and your baby is part of you. And if you don't have anybody to watch your baby, then the alternative is you're not getting support. So I have always advocated that if you need to bring your baby with you, bring your baby. If we're doing more intensive like trauma therapy, which often comes out of the work that I do with moms, then, we might have a discussion, like, are there other times when someone could watch baby? But sometimes that's not possible. And if you are going to see a therapist, maybe you've done the work, you've gone on Psychology Today, you call them up, I would ask, are you okay with me bringing my baby? Because many are. So a no does not mean you can't bring your baby to therapy. And I've also worked with local agencies around that, where some just are, we cannot do therapy if there's a baby present. They're going to hear things, they're going to sense things. Well, guess what's happening at home? If you're a mom and you're listening to this, then you probably might cry in front of your baby at home. And guess what? You're human. And we're that's okay. We're not here to make you feel guilty. We're here to say us too. I think that's fair. And so going to see a therapist to learn how to manage your emotions, understand your emotions, feel more in control of your life is going to mean less of what's happening at home. So baby is okay to be present.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, Amber, because people ask that all the time. Like, can I bring baby? So I'm completely virtual in my private practice. And I'm like, yes, even the groups that I run online, we've seen it all. Feeding baby, babies all of a sudden throwing up their milk everywhere, or, playing, or they're starting to crawl and you're running after baby and all those fun things. Like, I'm used to it by now. So absolutely ask if that's, a barrier for you and you can't get away. Of course, like if someone is home and they can have baby and you can have like an hour dedicated to yourself without taking care of baby, that would be lovely too for anyone out there. But if that's not possible, definitely advocate for yourself to be able to still attend. Yeah. For sure. Thank you. That's such a great point. And so, Amber, where can people find you?
So I am located in Barrie, so I see clients in person at 80 Bradford Street. But otherwise, I also offer virtual across the province of Ontario. And so my website is ambersperling.ca. And I'm happy if anybody has any questions, happy to answer questions, guide people in the right direction. I value, as I said earlier, I've got these words on my wall, community over competition. So if I'm not the therapist for you, I'm happy to connect people with other people that are.
Lovely. And I will put all of that and your information in the show notes so people can check that out. Thank you so much, Amber, for sharing about individual therapy and the work that you do and a bit about your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, you too. On this segment of the Climb podcast episode, I am talking to Kelley Hassanpour, who is a registered nurse psychotherapist. And Kelley runs groups, and we run group therapy together for NICU parents. And we are going to talk about the benefits of group therapy. So welcome, Kelley.
Hi, Christine. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So I always like to kind of bring the personal in. And so do you want to share just a bit about kind of your experience with a PMAD and kind of reaching out for support if you did, if you didn't, what did that look like for you?
Sure. So I had postpartum anxiety, which, looking back on it now, that was 5 years ago with my son. I now realize, like many people, I had anxiety my whole life, but, before having kids was able to cope with it with no problem. And then in the postpartum period, obviously that like anxiety really ramped up. But the interesting thing about it for me was that I was an NICU nurse before my son was born. And so obviously I've worked with new moms for a really long time. And I never recognized it in myself until my son was 13 months old. So first of all, even right there, I'm like, based on what care looks like in our system, if I, someone who worked with new parents all the time, couldn't recognize those symptoms in myself, how is the average person supposed to know that they're experiencing potentially a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder? So like I said, my son was 13 months old when I really realized that there was something going on. So maybe something, I think a lot of times, like myself too, I wondered what's the difference between quote unquote, new parent worry and anxiety.
Right.
And so at about 13 months, it became very evident that this was something beyond new parent worry. But it really wasn't until I started to have some fairly scary, intrusive thoughts where I realized okay, I need some support. So because my son was 13 months old, I didn't qualify for anything OHIP covered in terms of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders because everything really was only covered up to 12 months in Ontario in terms of new parent support. So it was really it fell to me to seek that support basically privately. I was lucky I had extended healthcare benefits at that time. And so I had that privilege of being able to reach out. for me, my first step was really visiting my GP, which was questionably helpful. But I did receive some support there. And then it was really important to me to find a therapist that like really aligned sort of with my values. And so I did find somebody, thankfully, who like I legitimately like thank for like really like, I don't know, saving my life, changing my life, one of those, who really gave me the support that I needed. But like I said, without those healthcare benefits or without that like ability, I'm not sure what I would have done.
Right. And because, the goal of these episodes is really to help people kind of where to start, where to look for people. And so if someone is looking for a therapist in private practice, where did you look? Where did you start?
Yeah. So for me, it was a kind of very roundabout way in that my anxiety was very much centered around my son's sleep.
Right.
But sleep, we know, is a very controversial topic in the new parent world. But for me, it was really important to find somebody who was like really attachment based. Because throughout the period of like infancy, one of the things was like I was getting very little sleep because my son was not a great sleeper. But for me and my family, like any sort of like cried out method was not an option. Like it just didn't feel good to us. And so, I remember at 6 months going to see a pediatrician because my son had reflux. And really the advice that I got instead of how to support the reflux or treat the reflux was, oh, you should just sleep train him. And then even when I went to see my GP after, like at the 13-month mark, she said to me, oh, you should just sleep train your son. And I was just like, that is not the answer to what is happening for either one of us right now. And so for me, it was like really important because I kind of stopped trusting people. I was like, I just feel worse about myself when I do seek help or seek support. And so it was really important for me that I found somebody who was not going to tell me that same thing.
Right.
I needed skills on top of like, I needed skills. I didn't need to sleep train my son. And so I really did like a search of therapists in Ontario, people who were offering it virtually, which was not like 5 years ago. That wasn't a big thing.
And again, just to be specific, did you just Google or did you go on a particular website?
So I went through, there is an organization that does like sleep education, but it's a non-sleep training. It's like biologically normal sleep kind of information. And I knew that they had like kind of like a manual or an information sheet. And in it, they had people who had contributed to it. And so I was like, okay, so if this like social worker, like this therapist had been involved in this, then I know she's not gonna like try to push this on me. Yeah. So I reached out to that person. They weren't available, but she passed me on to somebody else who she knew also had the same sort of values. She was also offering virtual at that time because she wasn't local to me. And so that's kind of how it was a very roundabout way of coming to it, but that's how I did it.
And people can go, sorry to interrupt you, people can go on psychologytoday.com. It's not just psychologists. You can find registered nurses in private practice and doing psychotherapy. You can find social service workers, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. Like you can find kind of the whole range of therapists and practitioners.
And then I would just say, like, it's really important, like, if something like that is really important to you, like, don't be afraid to reach out. Many therapists offer like a free consult, like a free 15 minutes to just, we know like the relationship is so important and you need to feel safe. So to reach out and book those kind of consult calls.
And I love that you actually highlighted that and that you were also able to do that for yourself, to find a therapist that aligned with your values and especially your parenting values. Because I agree, when we, especially in that vulnerable time, and if we are experiencing, for example, postpartum anxiety, I know for me, the symptom of excessive guilt was really, really present. So if I had someone that was, again, I also had healthcare professionals that told me things, that I should do differently and that I wasn't doing well. And that really impacted me. and
for sure.
stayed
You
with
just
me.
stop talking, right? But that's what happened to me. I just stopped saying that I was struggling.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's not what we want. So also it's okay to know, like, if a therapist is not, even if you do a consult and you have a session or two with them, and let's say they're not aligning with your values or you're not really getting a good vibe or clicking with them, it's okay
Yeah.
to look for a new therapist. That is totally okay. I just want to put that out there for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, in terms of your professional work, tell us about that shift that you made.
So I really made a shift after it was probably my son was about 2 and we were in the middle of COVID and there wasn't a lot of other things to do other than to think. And so I really started to think about, like what had I wished I had have had. And because sometimes I went to like groups, like mom and baby groups, and it felt more isolating than it did connecting sometimes. In that like everybody seemed like they had it together and like it just like everybody seemed fine. And then it wasn't until I was like, my son was like 2 or 3, I was like, okay, yeah, no, nobody has this together. Everybody just does a really great job of pretending that they do. And that brings in like a whole other like cultural context of parenting and all of that jazz, which that could be we have had a whole other podcast on that.
Yes.
Um, but really, I was like, I wish I had just had this place that I could have gone to and been with other like new parents who were saying like, this is hard. Like, this is really hard. And so you didn't feel alone in it. And I even felt like after a little while, I would kind of like drop a little like nugget of information about maybe having postpartum anxiety. And I found like as soon as I did that, a person would be like, oh my God, me too.
Yes.
And I was just like, why aren't we all doing this? And I get like it's hard to be at the middle of like a baby, like a baby music class and turn to the person beside you and be like, hey, are you having like profoundly intrusive and scary thoughts too?
Yes.
I kind of think about the Barbie movie, if you've seen that, of when she like turns to everybody and is like, hey, have you ever thought about dying?
Right.
But it's like the same sort of thing, right? Like it's very awkward to just turn to the person beside you and be like, hey, I'm having some really scary, intrusive thoughts. How about you? So I really like, long story short, started thinking about like what I wish I had had. And so I started a business where I now run like groups for different age groups. So like 0 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, and 9 to 18 months, where we talk about things that are specific to that age group and what the challenges might be. But like I facilitate the conversation so that it's not like somebody has to open first and say, hey, I'm having these really scary, intrusive thoughts about harming my baby.
Right.
We have a whole week dedicated to intrusive thoughts and where people can just have this, like we do some psychoeducation. So you kind of understand what's going on around you and then have some conversation about what that looks like for you and what are some tools we can use when, those intrusive thoughts are present.
Right. And like you said, it's like developing those kind of resources, those groups that you wish you had.
Yeah. And there's something really powerful about being in a group where like maybe it's okay to say like, I missed my life before I had a baby. Like I love my baby. And I always say to people, like, you don't have to tell me, like, you don't have to start that with I love my baby. I know you love your baby. But also to be like, like I really missed some elements of my life before I had a baby. Or like I'm really struggling with my relationship with my partner. Like I never expected it to be this hard. And just to give some words to the experience that people are having. And to even just like for things like missing your old life, for somebody to give it the name of like, yeah, you're grieving. Like you're grieving for the life that you had, that like, language can be really powerful to be able to give a name to something.
Yes. Yeah. I find that with clients when I introduce the concept of grief around, there's so much grief when we have kids, right?
Yeah.
And people, it's like a light bulb moment. And I've never had a client say, no, that's ridiculous. Like that's never happened. They're always like, oh my gosh, yes, it's grief. I'm so sad. I'm grieving my old life. I say it all the time. My kids are older, teenagers and, almost a teenager, and I still miss elements of my old life, You'd think I'd get over it by now, but no. So, yeah, no, that's fantastic. So, What have you seen in terms of that support you've created, those groups you've created? What have you seen with clients that come to your groups and how they respond and what they take away from those groups?
Yeah, well, I think, obviously I'm slightly biased. Um, but, there's some really amazing things that I've seen happen where like, because they do have these, like some people start coming when they're like, kids are like literally like 2 or 3 weeks old and they're in the like height of that newborn period and the height of that, like, what the heck is going on? Like, what have I done? But again, they're able to have this like safe space to say all those things. And like we had one group who was together, there was four of them. They were together, like they did the 0 to 6 months group and stayed with me throughout the 18 months. And like they didn't know each other before. They were able to connect in a way in which like they realized like, oh, I'm not the only person feeling this way. Um, and they now call it, like, now we're almost like 2 years in, like they're all like their babies are almost 2 and they still call each other the team. And so they're like, if they have like a really hard parenting moment, they're like, I gotta contact the team and talk about it. So that was like I'm going to say like a really special group to come through. But I know now like groups that I had last year, they're still meeting once a week, like in the park to just stay connected with each other. And I just think, whether you're still having those really hard conversations or whether you're just like, you've built that community, that's really my hope is to just, because, like I said, I felt so isolated in those moments. I felt so alone in what I was experiencing. And whether we're talking about the actual like PMAD or even just the like realities of just adjusting to parenthood, to just really like build that community for people to be like, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I love that. That's so incredible. And that's one of the beautiful gifts of group work and peer support in that group environment, right? Of like, me too, me too. And it's so interesting because as a parent, as a neurodivergent parent, I'm, as many of you probably know, I'm quite outgoing. However, I'm also very introverted in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a vulnerability piece, right? It's different than being social. And yeah.
Yeah. And it's different when you're with people that you trust and you feel comfortable with. I've never been to a quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, you can't see me, but a mom and baby group or a parent and baby group. I've never been to one because I've always felt different.
Yeah.
And so finding that space where like I could be me and be authentic, I was like, well, no, like I can't do that in a regular like parent and baby class. So I never went to any, but I love if I had this type of group in my area when I had kids, I would have gone, kind of more that focus on the parent and what you're experiencing as a parent, and then being able to build community from there, I think is just incredible.
Yeah. And with those groups too, like I call them like an education and support group,
Yeah.
as opposed to like a therapy group. And then, but even though like there are like, it's a therapy group. um, but then like I then also have a like actual therapy group that we call like a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder support group. And so oftentimes those like education and support groups are like that intro into that idea of like, oh, it's okay to seek support in this way in a group situation.
Absolutely. And so we, of course, run our NICU therapy group as well. And so what do you see? Because that's, something very specific, right? And a very specific experience. And so in that, what do you see the benefits for parents who have gone through something very specific? What do you see the benefits in that group?
Well, yeah, I think you and I can both say like we see, when the moms usually, I say moms, we've had one dad. So the parents who enter our groups usually on like week 1, it's a lot of like, I'm the only one who's experienced this. Like I'm the only one who had like lots of people don't even know what the NICU is. I have to do so much explaining of like what's going on, or where we are at now. And so many people have just like never met another parent who had a baby in the NICU and what that looks like. And again, like such an isolating, overwhelming experience. And then, especially as we head into cold and flu season, and so many parents, again, feel so isolated in this, like, my baby was premature and I need to protect my baby potentially in a different way than like somebody who didn't have a baby in the NICU, and the lack of understanding that's out there. So again, yes, I think you and I give, like, it's a therapy group. We work through a lot of stuff in the group. I think one of the most powerful things though that comes out of it is the peer support.
And so many times people will comment, like the feedback we get is, I love that I don't have to explain what all of this medical stuff means, because
it's so exhausting to have to do every time you meet somebody, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And just like that, people get it, even though everyone's story is different and unique, but there's so much commonality, right? That brings us together as humans. And yeah, that peer support, and then people connecting afterwards and continuing on, that can be such a wonderful piece of connecting with people on that authentic, vulnerable level, in a situation that is unfortunately really, really hard, but it's like, you get me and I get you. And that's so.
And I think for a lot of people, like you and I know that, like, trauma for so much of the population is just thought to be like, you've had a traumatic event. Again, oftentimes people would not understand that being in the NICU is a traumatic event. But to know, like, I'm 9, 10, 11, 12 months out of it. I'm a year or 2 or 3 out of it, and I'm having trauma symptoms. And, oh, I'm not the only one who's having trauma symptoms, and that there is support for that. It's not just you have to live with it.
Absolutely. So, looking around for a therapist, like we said, kind of course, Google or, Psychology Today, looking for a therapist that maybe aligns with your values, but also works with that particular issue that you're bringing, and then seeing if they run a group, or looking for groups in particular that, would be helpful for your experience, can be so helpful. What do you think is the biggest barrier for people accessing a therapy group or a support group?
Cost,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
vulnerability. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And the good thing is, virtual, right, can be super helpful. That, we run our NICU group virtually, which is great. So you can look for in-person groups in your area or virtual groups. They do exist for sure. Our group, for example, we do thankfully have funding from Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. And, so we're lucky in that sense that we can offer the group for free. But looking around for sliding scale options, subsidy options, free
like perinatal well-being.
Yes. Like at PWO, Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario, we do have, low cost sliding scale options, free options for groups, and peer support drop-in groups, which we talked about, Karen, in the earlier segment. But, definitely just reach out anywhere and ask for help in navigating and looking.
And I would say, like, the majority of therapists, I think, who work in perinatal mental health, we are all often here because of our own experiences. And so I would say most people that I have come across, like, this is really about community for them. And most people are not afraid to say, like, hey, that's maybe not my area of expertise, but I can help connect you to others.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know, walking into a group, like I said, I never went to a parent and baby group. Because of my own anxiety, I get walking into a group or joining a group can be really tough. However, if you can, like,
Find the right one.
Yeah, find the right one, get yourself through, like, into that first group, you might find some really incredible benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Kelley, for sharing about your story and your group work that you do. And where can people reach you?
So you can find me on my website. It's probably the easiest, at www.parentingfromwithin.ca, or Instagram, at parenting_from_within_.
Yes.
Those are usually the two best ways, and all my contact information is on both of those.
Perfect. And I will include all of those in the show notes for sure, so anyone can find them right in the show notes to find you and reach out to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait to hear the others.
Yes, thank you.
Segments as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this bonus episode for our virtual Climb Out of the Darkness fundraising event. Be sure to listen to Tuesday's episode where I spoke with Karen, Nikki, and Allison. Please donate to our fundraising efforts either from our website, there's a big button on the top of the page, or you can check the link in the show notes. Please reach out for help and check the show notes for our guest info and how to access support.